The Cottage. Maddie prided herself on her serene slice of solitude. A quaint cottage tucked into the crook of the wood's arm. Freelancing from home, she danced with deadlines, her life punctuated by the clicks of a keyboard rather than the cacophony of city life. Her companions were the rhythmic tick-tock of the kitchen clock, the soft hum of the refrigerator, and the occasional rustling of wildlife beyond her windows. It was an undisturbed life, a symphony of quiet moments, until the night that silence was breached. It began as an oddity, a quirk in the night that she first dismissed as her imagination. A scratch at the window, a thud on the wall, things she ascribed to the restless critters that roamed the woods. But when the shadow loomed at her window, the outline of a head too large, too still, to belong to any animal, Maddie's blood ran cold. "Just a trick of the light," she whispered to herself, clutching the cup of tea that suddenly seemed to have lost its warmth. But the peace of night was shattered when the doorknob to her front door rattled aggressively. Maddie froze, her heart hammering in her chest. She knew she'd locked the door. She always did as the sky turned to twilight. Silent, she crept to the hallway, straining her ears for another sound. Nothing. Maybe it was just the wind. Then came the laughter. A distorted cacophony that oozed through the cracks of her sanctuary. It was a sound meant for joy, now twisted into a grotesque parody of mirth. She recognized it instantly, the distinctive pitch of a clown's laugh, high and unhinged. Maddie's stomach knotted. "This can't be happening," she hissed, fear strangling her voice. She grabbed her phone to dial 911, but the screen mocked her with its utter blackness. The battery was dead. Her breathing became shallow as she realized how isolated she truly was, her nearest neighbor a mile away, an eternity in the dead of night. The laugh came again, closer, as if just outside her living room. Maddie crept towards the peephole and dared a glance. The sight stole the scream from her throat. A clown stood at her door, its mask a distorted nightmare of Technicolor paint, his eyes empty sockets of black. Its head cocked to one side as if amused by the terror it incited. She stumbled backward, tripping over her own feet as the lights flickered and died, plunging her world into darkness. In the gloom, the laugh echoed again, now joined by the sickening sound of a knife being dragged along the walls of her home. A sensory reminder of the intruder's sinister presence. With trembling hands, Maddie felt for the fireplace poker, her fingers wrapping around the cold metal. She had to defend herself. She wouldn't go down without a fight. The back door creaked open, sending a fresh wave of terror coursing through her. He was inside. "Fuck off," she screamed into the darkness, her voice betraying the quiver of fear that shook her entire body. "I've called the cops, you sick bastard." All lies to deter him to survive. Her heart thrashed against her ribcage as she tiptoed through her own home, now a labyrinthine trap. The laugh circled her, the intruder a specter in the darkness, always out of sight, always just a step behind. Maddie's once safe haven had transformed into a claustrophobic cage with the clown as her tormentor, playing hide-and-seek with a predator. For hours, or perhaps only minutes, time stretched into an endless loop of cat and mouse until the silence returned. Maddie didn't dare believe it was over, her grip on the poker unwavering, her body coiled tight with anticipation. Dawn's light crept timidly through the cracks, and Maddie allowed herself a moment to breathe, to believe she might have survived the nightmare. The door was ajar, the woods outside undisturbed by the night's horrors. Had the intruder left? Or was this another game, another tactic to draw her out? Her relief was short-lived as a shadow detached itself from the stillness of her living room. The clown, its mask now a grotesque caricature in the daylight, advanced with deliberate, unhurried steps, a butcher's knife glinting in its hand. "This is for you," it whispered through the mask, a voice human and not. A twisted serenade for its chosen victim. Maddie's scream finally found its way out as she lunged with the poker, the fight for life igniting her with a primal force. The metal connected and the clown staggered, the laughter finally silenced. When the police arrived, alerted by a concerned neighbor who'd heard the commotion, they found Maddie clutching the bloody poker, the clown's mask lying discarded beside a lifeless, unmasked intruder, his last laugh forever etched into the twisted smile of the latex facade. The detective said she was lucky to be alive. Maddie knew better. Luck had no home here in the aftermath of terror. As she boarded up her windows and locked her doors, she understood. The mask wasn't what was haunted. It was now the house, the woods, the very air she breathed. And as she lay awake at night listening to the silence, she'd wonder if she'd ever feel alone again. The Orphan. Tom and Sarah Thompson, a loving couple in their mid-30s, resided in a quaint, humble house nestled at the end of Maple Street. Their life was a canvas painted with strokes of love and dashes of sadness, the sadness rooted in their inability to conceive. The empty rooms echoed with the laughter and cries of the child they yearned for, a silence that weighed heavily on their hearts. After a tumultuous wave of consideration and emotional preparation, they decided to adopt. They welcomed Lily, a 7-year-old with sparkling eyes that masked a sea of unspoken words, into their lives. Lily seemed like a gift to their barren existence, filling the spaces of their home with the soft pattering of little feet and innocent chuckles. Months passed, woven into the fabric of normalcy and familial warmth. The disturbing quietness of Lily started to gradually unravel, revealing a tapestry of eerie silences and strange behaviors. However, it all remained subtle, hidden beneath the veil of adjustment and attachment issues. One fateful night, the realms of ordinary were shattered. Tom and Sarah were wrapped in the arms of sleep when an unsettling coldness crawled into their room. A shadow, darker than the night itself, loomed at the foot of their bed. It was a figure, towering and ominous, a silhouette forged of menace and terror. It just stood there, an unwavering presence casting waves of malice that filled the room. Frozen, Tom and Sarah could only watch in horror, their breaths caught in the icy grip of fear. And then, as the clock chimed, it vanished, leaving behind a room filled with the disturbing afterimages of its existence. Time began to unveil a series of unsettling disturbances. Lily's room became a stage where the curtains of normalcy were pulled back, revealing acts of whispered conversations with the unseen and strange, unsettling noises. Objects around the house seemed to shift and vanish, only to appear in the most unexpected of places. Days melted into a pool of uneasiness, each moment heavy with a foreboding presence that seemed to lurk in the corners, in the silences and in the shadows that seemed darker, more sinister. Lily's behavior echoed with a strange detachment. Her actions seemed orchestrated by strings held by unseen hands. Night after night, Tom and Sarah found themselves caught in a whirlwind of terrifying occurrences. The soft but disturbing sound of footsteps prowling the hallways, doors creaking open, and the flickering of lights casting unsettling patterns on the walls. The house seemed to breathe with a life of its own, each breath echoing with the whispers of torment. The culmination of these horrifying orchestrations revealed itself on a night shrouded in the echoes of torment. Tom and Sarah stood at the threshold of the living room, the space dimly lit by the half-moon's light piercing through the parted curtains. The furniture cast elongated, distorted shadows across the wooden floor, as if they were stretching out to them, beckoning them into a nightmarish embrace. They could barely discern Lily's small form, standing motionless in the center of the room, her nightgown a ghostly white against the encroaching darkness. "Lily, baby, what's wrong?" Sarah's voice quivered, slicing through the heavy silence. Her heart pounded against her ribcage, a staccato beat that seemed to resonate with the thickening air. Tom's hand found hers, gripping it with a silent promise of shared courage. They took tentative steps forward, each footfall echoing like a drumbeat foretelling doom. The shadows began to stir, rising and falling as if breathing. Lily's silhouette seemed to fracture, casting multiple overlapping images of herself on the walls, a spectral display of marionettes waiting for the cue of their master's call. The whispers swelled from hushed tones to a cacophony of hisses and murmurs, a language of darkness that twisted the very air. "Lily, look at me, please," Sarah pleaded, tears blurring her vision, the room spinning with an unholy life. As if on cue, Lily raised her head, her movements mechanical and disjointed. Her eyes, once bright with the innocence of childhood, now shimmered with an abyssal void, an empty expanse that seemed to drink in the light around her. Her lips moved, but the voice that emerged was not her own, a guttural, sibilant tone that spoke of ages and agonies beyond their understanding. The room erupted into a vortex of supernatural fury. Books flew from shelves with the force of missiles. Pictures' frames shattered, their glass teeth glittering dangerously across the floor. The very foundations of the house groaned under the pressure of an unseen force, the air electrified with malice. Tom and Sarah were frozen, paralyzed not by fear alone, but by an invisible force that constricted their limbs, crushed their chests, silenced their screams. The shadows converged on Lily, swirling around her like dark waters churning in a tempest. The little girl they knew was submerged beneath the waves of darkness, a helpless pawn in a game played by entities as ancient as they were evil. And then, with a suddenness that stole the breath from the room, the shadows retracted. The whispers faded, and the chaos stilled. The oppressive darkness lifted, revealing the aftermath of terror, a room in disarray, the air still trembling with the remnants of the unearthly storm. On the floor lay Tom and Sarah, their eyes open but unseeing, their expressions frozen in a tableau of horror. They were gone, spirits untethered from the world they knew, victims of a haunting that had preyed upon the love they bore for their adopted daughter. The morning light crept timidly into the room, touching the small, frail body of Lily, who sat among the ruin, alone but unharmed. Her eyes were closed, her chest rising and falling with the rhythm of life, but something essential was missing from her, the spark that had once animated her being. Weeks passed, and the story of the Thompsons' tragic end became a whispered legend. The house on Maple Street stood empty, a sentinel keeping watch over memories best forgotten. Sorrow House. Jen and Alara weren't strangers to the supernatural. Both in their late 20s, they had spent a considerable amount of time exploring the haunted crevices of the world, seeking the thrill that only the unknown could provide. Jen was a strong, outspoken woman driven by adrenaline and an unyielding curiosity. Alara, more reserved and thoughtful, was drawn to the mysteries of the afterlife. Seeking understanding in the shadowy realms beyond mortal comprehension, united by their dark interest, they found themselves standing before the dreaded house on Harrow's Lane. An undying legend spoke of a vengeful spirit that lingered there, ensnared within the cracked walls and dusty corridors, a remnant of a life marked by rage and sorrow. "Ready for this?" Jen asked, her voice firm despite the unsettling ambiance that the old house emanated. Yeah, Ilara replied, taking a deep breath. Let's find out what's haunting this damn place. The door creaked open, revealing the house's gloomy interior. They stepped in, their flashlights cutting through the pervading darkness. As they explored the downstairs rooms, an unsettling silence seemed to smother the space, weighing down the very air around them. They entered what seemed like a living room, the decaying remnants of furniture scattered around, covered in a thick layer of dust. As they navigated through, a sudden, deafening bang echoed through the house. They spun around, their flashlights scanning the shadows. What the fuck was that? Jen muttered, her eyes wide, searching the dark corners of the room. They cautiously moved forward, a chill spreading through the room, making the dim light of their flashlights seem to shudder. Entering a narrow, musty hallway, the fading wallpaper seemed to be marked with the agony of forgotten times. As they continued, another abrupt noise filled the air, the sound of frantic footsteps above them. They exchanged a worried glance, a silent agreement to move forward, hearts pounding in their chests. Jen led the way up the creaky staircase, each step groaning under their weight. Reaching the top, they walked into a room filled with a suffocating sense of despair. Old tattered curtains hung lifelessly. Shattered glass from the broken window lay scattered like deadly jewels. As they explored, a soft whisper seemed to float through the room, a breeze that made the curtains flutter with a ghostly rhythm. Suddenly, all the doors slammed shut with a force that echoed through the house, causing them to jump. Shit, Ilara, Jen said, trying to maintain her composure. This place is really fucking haunted. A sudden cold engulfed them, their breaths visible in the icy air. The shadows on the walls seemed to move, shifting ominously as if hiding some malevolent presence. A stifling sensation of being watched began to crawl under their skin. Moving to another room, their flashlights revealed disturbed dust as though something, or someone, had recently moved through. As they stood there, a horrifying scream pierced the oppressive silence, swirling around them like a tangible form of terror. The sinister presence seemed to close in on them, the temperature dropping even further. Their flashlights flickered, casting an eerie play of shadows that seemed to dance with a mind of its own. In the waning light, a figure began to manifest, a woman, spectral and terrifying. Her eyes were hollows of darkness, and her long, unkempt hair seemed to flow with an otherworldly life. "Fuck, there she is," Jen whispered, her voice barely more than a strained breath. The ghostly figure moved erratically, appearing and disappearing, leaving behind a trail of icy cold. Terror pulsed through the veins of Jen and Ilara, a raw, unforgiving fear that clenched their hearts with icy fingers. The ghostly figure's presence was a suffocating darkness that seemed to sap the very warmth from the room. Her image flickered with malevolence, appearing in flashes of terror that seemed to defy the very laws of reality. "Fuck, run!" Jen screamed, her voice tearing through the silence as they spun around, rushing to escape the room. The corridors became a nightmarish maze, shadows warping, walls seeming to breathe with a life of their own. They heard the erratic patter of ghostly footsteps, a sound that echoed from everywhere yet nowhere, infusing the space with a horror that was almost palpable. The ghost appeared again, this time at the end of the corridor, her form distorted and eyes hollow pits of despair. With a shriek that echoed through the decaying hall, she rushed toward them, a force of unnatural speed. Jen and Ilara turned, running desperately, gasping for breath that seemed too thick to breathe. Doors slammed around them, the house itself seeming to come alive with the spirit's rage, participating in the ghastly chase. They stumbled into another room, the darkness enveloping them. The flickering light of their flashlights barely cut through the oppressive blackness. The room seemed to spin, walls closing in, the ghost appearing and disappearing in chaotic flashes on the ceiling. In the corners of the room, behind the tattered curtains. "Shit, Ilara, where is she?" Jen panted, her voice high with terror. "Fucking where?" Everywhere, Alara choked out, tears streaming down her face. She's fucking everywhere. With a flash of movement too swift to comprehend, the ghost materialized before them, her face twisted in a horrifying visage. They scrambled back, their screams reverberating through the haunted space. Racing through another doorway, they found themselves in the cold, desolate kitchen. The ghost was relentless, her form a fleeting horror in the peripheries of their vision. She seemed to ooze from the very walls, her shape warping, extending in nightmarish waves, her tormented visage appearing in the grimy windows and reflective surfaces. Alara tripped, her body hitting the floor with a thud. Jen tried to help her up, but the spirit was upon them, her form a swirling darkness, her voice a cacophony of haunting screams and whispers. "No," Jen cried, pulling Alara to her feet, but it was too late. The ghost's icy hands seemed to close around them, the room spinning into a vortex of shadows and terror. In those final moments, the horrifying reality crashed down upon them. There was no escape from this torment. Their screams became a part of the house's haunted symphony, echoes of terror that would linger in its cursed walls. The darkness consumed them, their existences extinguished in a storm of spectral rage and sorrow. And so the house on Harrow's Lane remained, a vessel of unspeakable horror, the tormented spirits within forever bound to its nightmarish embrace, waiting in the shadows to unleash their fury on those who dared to cross the forsaken threshold.